I think the project you just showed is a fascinating example of how actually architecture can provide a pretty effective solution to, as you said, the condition of women's life in Iran, because without that sort of separation, those services would not be available, whether it was, you know, going to the gym or beauty treatment or the clinic, you know, which I think is a really interesting thing. These, you know, for people from the West, of course, the idea of separating those things would be, well, you would do it for certain sorts of things, but not for others. But I think it's a very interesting way of looking at a particular society and how you can make life better for many of the people than it would otherwise be. So I think, again, in terms of justice, this is a really interesting project. And I think this is, you know, both of the projects we've seen from Islam and from Pear are about showing architecture and justice. But I wonder if I can sort of throw out a different point, which is the other side of this subject, which is power. And power, of course, can be either just or unjust. And indeed, you know, part of the, you know, history of governance of all sorts is about whether power is just and what makes it just. At what point can you establish a hierarchy and expect, you know, some sort of conformity to it? And I wonder if, you know, the architecture, you know, has obviously always expressed power. If you think of, you know, castles in the European Middle Ages or all sorts of other buildings about it expressing power. But can you think of a way in which a building could express power, but in a just way, in, let's say, a democratic way?
Yes. Typically in Iran, the fitness, wellness, beauty spas is like either in the building, completely closed, or even sometimes it's like an office in the office, within the office building. But like the beauty of this project is like dedicating 5 floors for women inclusive, you know, women inclusive activities, which is like, you know, a really meaningful things to empower women. And another beauty of this project is like instead of closing the woman, instead of completely put them in the concrete shell that no, you know, in a building without any windows, without anything to not be seen from outside, this project bravely used the perforated metal panels to at least give them the glimpse of outside, and from outside give them the glimpse of life which is going on in these floors.
No, I think that's very interesting because, of course, what you're saying is that these activities deserve their dignity, they deserve their marking in the urban environment.
Yes.
And that's partly to make those activities more enjoyable for the people who are doing them, but also to celebrate the fact that they are happening to people who might not be there, so that so men would be aware of them happening, even if they can't join the women in doing them, which
Exactly.
I think is, and through that, of course, you begin to establish a series of relations that might be more equitable, if not completely equal. I mean, I raise this point because at the moment I'm working on a book about architecture in South Africa, which has many of the problems that you were describing, which were, until, you know, the last 20 or 30 years, enshrined in law, and they're still enshrined in economic relations. And one of the problems there is to try to get people who had no political voice at all to understand they do have a political voice, but rather than exercising it by, you know, through violent means, they should exercise it through constitutional means, because that's a way that, however painful and slow it may be, you might get to a better society. And I think Islam, what you're doing is setting the ground, if I may say, for that, for these people who are migrants on the whole, who have no, I guess, citizenship rights where they are, but can, you know, through the fact that they have some sort of decent life, and they may begin to feel some sort of relationship with Dubai or whichever state they're living in, and they might over time, and this would take several generations, I guess, but they might become citizens of that state.
So actually, I will back to your first point about the power. I will quote John here. Like we always forget the power of emotions in what we do. I always think that the same amount of physical efforts that we do, either we build a good building or bad building, the same. The physical materiality that you put in a building, it is the same. But what is the difference is the real act or the intention. So we as architects, we face a lot of frustration during our, practicing the profession of architecture nowadays. But we forget really one of the most important things about architecture, that we design for people. And those people have right and emotions. How we can really think about this. Back to the second point, that it's not, I don't believe that architecture itself can solve the problem of the world. It could be an open statement that was never end. No. Architects lost the power really to do many good things on the communities. But at least if we have the chance to do a little improvement through the design or thinking with intention, I think this is so easy to anyone to do, because these buildings, it's been designed by architects. So it's the power of just the intention. If you really care, you will.
Sorry, because I would suggest that you're absolutely right, that architecture cannot in itself create a just society. But what it can do is indicate the possibilities of a just society.
True.
And I think that's the interesting point that actually both of you were moving towards.
Yeah, and I think that there is many happening in the architecture. Many things are happening in the architecture discourse. I think we are going to more the fictional side of the reality, but I think there is very robust issues that we didn't, sometimes even we fear to talk about. I was really fascinated by Venice Benelli Biarchi when he just brought laborers, really very creative labor in the middle of the arsenale to show that talent, there is so much talent behind this. Because how many years for you for WAF here, Jim? It's a lot of years. Did you ever found an architect bringing a laborer with him?
No, I mean, you're right, but it goes back to when I was a graduate student studying architectural history, that in the 19th century in the UK, there was an enormous concern about the dignity of the labourer. Not, and it was, there was the phrase which then became popular within Marxist thought, the division of labour. Yeah. And, the idea of division of labour where the architect, who is a so-called gentleman and has privilege for that reason, designs things, and then the workman has to make it, but he can't think for himself. And this was a big problem, particularly for the great social reformer and critic John Ruskin in the 19th century. And indeed, it made a very fundamental starting point for the Labour Party in the UK, which it's completely lost now. It doesn't even understand work, let alone the dignity of work. So I was very interested that you would use the word dignity, because that I think is a really important one.
It's very important also. I think it's the thing that we have all to change in our mind, that architecture is a very important profession, and we cannot do it only by ourselves. We can think, but to build something, you need another people. So it's about collective instead of one ego. It's about the collective. The moment we start have this kind of mind shift, I think by very simple act of design, as I mentioned, we can have improved the life of the community.
Yeah. No, I think it's very important, but it goes back, beyond the dignity of work to the dignity of the individual. And I think that's what your project is doing. It's saying that, women have a dignity. They have certain requirements, certain needs, certain wishes, certain desires, which can be expressed and can be celebrated and enjoyed. Whether it's beauty treatment, or whether it's having a health problem resolved, or whether it's just doing exercise and feeling, getting fit. All of those things are really important, and how we can create, a public realm, even if it has to be differentiated in certain ways, where everyone has their place, and that place is recognized as valuable and dignified, I think is a really important point. Good. Well, look, thank you both very much. for concluding what I think has been a really good day of presentations.